In other words, they were written in a culture that used symbolic numbers and mathematical formulas. But it would be inaccurate to say that means the author meant for it to be understood as entirely fictional. That would be a slippery slope fallacy and assume more that is being said. Many argue the ages have to be literal because they appear random and are not ideal numbers that show up in other places in Scripture. Well, this is partially true, but that is because scholars recognize they are mathematical formulas utilizing a sexagesimal counting system, or base 60. Ancient Sumerians and Babylonians didn't count like us. We use a decimal system, a base 10 system, because we have 10 fingers. So a new set starts at 10, 20, 30, and so on. This is not how ancient Sumerians counted, but with a base 60 system. They would count the 12 segments of the 4 fingers, and then multiply that by 5 fingers, which gets you to 60. The ancient base 60 system is where we get 360 degrees in a circle, or time segments of 60 seconds in a minute and 60 minutes in an hour. The Mesopotamians had a 360-day year calendar, with a 13th month added every 6 years to make up for the missing days. Considering the biblical story begins in the area of Sumer before Abraham moves to Canaan, this would correlate nicely. Now, notice 21 of the 30 ages listed are divisible by 5, and another 8 become divisible by 5 by subtracting 7, and the last does as well by adding multiples of 7. This is an odd coincidence. Kenton Sparks notes the odds of all 30 ages coincidentally ending in either a 0, 2, 5, 7, or 9 is 0.0000006% possible. Lloyd Bailey compared this with a list of kings that reigned in Israel and Judah from the Book of Kings, all of which end in every available number of a decimal system. Only 5 are divisible by 5, and no pattern forms. The sequence is truly random. The genealogies in Genesis 5 and 11 do not seem to be. When you look at Genesis 5 and 11 in light of this, a pattern emerges. All of these ages correlate with a base 60 numerical system, and were probably used to express symbolic importance, perhaps representing their character, accomplishments, or relationship with God. Lloyd Bailey says, "Such analysis and comparison does not suggest that the biblical figures are not true. Rather, it raises the possibility that they depict a mode of truth that differs from modern concern with chronological accuracy." In other words, the biblical authors were not interested in exact chronology, like we put a strong emphasis on today. This is a misreading of Scripture with modern lenses. Rather, the biblical authors were using symbolic numbers to represent the unfolding of God's plan from Adam to Abraham down to Moses. The numbers of each patriarch have some symbolic importance. Although we do not know entirely what each individual age is meant to represent, additional clues still speak to this. For example, it is not by accident Enoch, who walked with God, was the 7th from Adam. There is that sacred number 7 again. His age was exactly 365 years, correlating to the 365 days of a solar year. Both numbers probably correlate to information specifically about Enoch, perhaps representing completion in some way. The Lamech of Seth's line is 777, contrasting him with Lamech, the descendant of Cain, who boasted a 77-fold vengeance. Lamech is also the son of Methuselah, whose gematria is exactly 777. This might represent Lamech's moral character for blessing his son Noah, the flood hero. Interestingly enough, the use of the base 60 system is seen in Genesis 1 to 11. But after that, with Abraham and his descendants, specific ideal numbers seem to be used. This seems to be a reoccurring cultural theme until the times when Chronicles and Kings were written, where exact literal number usage is applied more. This would suggest different authors for each section, and could possibly represent different time periods. Genesis 1 to 11 may be a much older tradition than the later history of Abraham's descendants, and that having been written long before later biblical texts that use literal numbers more often within a decimal system. However, the use of base 60 and ideal numbers did not die out during later time periods. But the use of a base 60 system in Genesis 1 to 11 seems to imply different authors for the first sections of Genesis, and could also be a much older tradition than the rest of Genesis, and show more affinity to ancient Sumer, whereas the time of Abraham and his descendants show more affinity to Egypt and the cities in Canaan.